to see all of you.
Hi there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Future-Proof Your Travel Programs for the CSRD. I'm Kelly Mangle. I lead marketing at Clarisite, and I'm really excited to have you all here. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I just want to review. The first is the live poll we have open right now. If you would take a moment to answer the questions, it will help us gauge everyone's goals and level of interest for future webinars. As for today's webinar, it will last 60 minutes, which includes time at the end for questions. Please use the Q&A window in the Zoom toolbar to submit your questions at any point. With that, I'd like to introduce our host, Clarisite CEO, Adam Braun. Adam is a New York Times bestselling author, globally recognized speaker, 3-time entrepreneur, and the father of not one, but 2 sets of twins. His Clarisite story began at the home of his former college roommate and now co-founder Phil Charm as they watched their young kids play. Together and with the rest of the Clarisite team, they are on a mission to help organizations turn climate intention into action. Adam, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly. We're fortunate at Clarisite to be able to convene these types of conversations more or less on a monthly basis, but it's quite rare that we have a panel with so many distinguished experts on such a salient topic that is so relevant to such a topical issue. In particular, today we'll be addressing how companies and large-scale enterprise in particular can really future-proof your travel programs in particular for the realities of this new world that we find ourselves in, oriented towards the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And so from a kind of agenda standpoint, I wanted to just start off and ground us in how we'll spend the time together. Then I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll dig into the conversation. So we'll begin with just a brief overview of CSRD at a glance. From there, we'll move into the particular implications that CSRD will have on business travel with a round-robin discussion as part of that across a variety of topics that we've prepared for today's conversation, inclusive of predictions, priorities, as well as trends. And then we'll really anchor the conversation in the path forward, how to future-proof your business for success. And then finally, we'll make space for audience Q&A. So just be aware that throughout today's conversations, if you have particular questions, we would encourage you to submit those into the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that they get addressed appropriately towards the conclusion of our time together. So with that said, I'm incredibly excited to introduce our distinguished panelists. Joining me today, we have Patrick Deemer, Sally Higgs, and Angela Lilly. Patrick is an independent consultant, board member, business angel, chair of the European Network of Business Travel Association, and recently drove the, Patrick, hopefully I pronounced this correctly, Rally Dakar as navigator, coming in 11th place in the classic category. Sally has been in the travel industry for 24 years and currently holds the role of travel and events sustainability manager at Festive Road. A fun fact about Sally is her first job was dressing up as a big chocolate bean and entertaining people at Cadbury's World, where she got to eat as much chocolate as she wanted for free, which sounds like just about the best job possible. And then finally, Angela has been head of travel management at Erste Group in Austria for more than 10 years, where she actively promotes topics of digitalization, process optimization with a special focus on sustainability. In addition to being a founding member of BT4 Europe, Angela is also an active board member of the Austrian Business Travel Association. So with that said, why don't we jump into the conversation? And I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, to just provide an overview of CSRD at a glance, and then we can dig into subsequent topics from there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. Great to be with everybody here. And thank you very much for the very kind and charming introduction. Let me briefly take you through the most important elements of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But let me first say that it is a piece of legislation drafted and decided by the European Commission. So it will become, or it is the law for the European Union and all companies active in the European Union, even though these companies might have shareholders and owners outside of the EU. Most importantly, yes, US companies, as much as they fall under the criteria with their European subsidiaries, will also have to comply with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive by the EU. The EU has decided a very ambitious and far-reaching sustainability agenda already some years ago, and you need to see this in the context of their strategy Fit for 55, which has a lot of individual laws which already have been decided or are still in the process of being to be decided, to make actually our societies, our travel, and the way we spend energy and our footprint more greener going forward. Now, the CSRD has a number of important milestones. It is a requirement to report on your sustainability strategy and your greenhouse gas emissions. It starts with the year we are in, so 2024, and the first time you need to produce a report is January 2025. So in the first round of reporting, only very large companies fall under the reporting requirement. And you can see it on the chart. It's 500 plus employees, it's 40 million net turnover, and 200 million in assets. Two of these three conditions are going to be met. And you see that the further we go down the timeline, the more companies are going to be involved. Eventually, please consider that your company will definitely be involved, because if you are an active travel manager, you are most likely in a company which is not a very small SME. And therefore, at some point in time, you are on the hook, so to say. Using the expression on the hook, let me from a BT for Europe perspective also say that from business travel wants to be more sustainable, business travel needs to be greener. And so as the buyers of business travel, in principle, we support the European Commission in its drive to become more and to require more sustainable business travel. A little side note, and then I pass it back to you, Adam. Just this year, there was a delay of the implementation of the CSRD decided, and we have more or less desperately tried to find out before this webinar what this delay actually meant in practical terms. For some industries, the timeline is going to be delayed by 2 years. But it's being decided, that was decided already by the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission, but it's not published in the European, it's not, the law hasn't been published yet. So we'll need to offer to all participants at the webinar whether the timeline, which you can see on the chart here, is actually what you need to work with, or whether we can all relax a little bit and see whether we can implement and see how we implement it at a later date. But that remains to be seen. It's work in progress, so to say. Adam.
Thank you for that summary. Really, really helpful, Patrick. And so as we transition into the implications of CSRD for corporate travel programs, we really wanted to make sure that this section was about how leaders can prepare for what is ahead. We know that data collection really has to start based on Jan 1, 2024 data. So many of you, I'm sure, have tried to preemptively get ahead of this towards the end of last year, or you're now in some version of trying to play catch up currently. And so with that said, if we dig into the first particular topic that I'd love for Sally in particular to help us unpack, be curious to hear from your perspective, what are some emerging trends that travel managers should consider as they prepare for the future and CSRD?
Thanks, Adam. It's a really good question, because there's some emerging trends which align really nicely to CSRD. So I think everyone's quite familiar with, and maybe a bit of fatigue on and reporting CO2 emissions and methodologies. But what's coming out more recently is looking beyond carbon. And there are significant data points within CSRD that are not about collecting carbon data. So biodiversity is a big one in there. Biodiversity in business travel is quite a complex subject, but it's quite new at the moment. But I think there's going to be quite a bit coming out. And I think especially within hotels and venues, biodiversity really you can look at your supply chain. That's bringing it right back to a travel program. How does that affect you and what can you do? You can maybe look at adding some biodiversity questions into your RFPs, or even adding addendums, but specifically into your hotels and venues. So biodiversity is things like maybe even growing your own food, having a beehive on the hotel roof. That is not a marketing ploy. Without bumblebees, we all starve. Like, bumblebees are so important and endangered. So it's little things like that are completely outside of counting your carbon emissions. There's other things like reducing water waste and grey water usage and things like that. Again, drinking water is becoming quite finite. So there's lots of things that you can work with your supply chain on. And also don't forget social sustainability. There is a whole section in CSRD on the workforce and the value chain. So again, within your travel supplier groups, is making sure that your suppliers have got really good employee standards in place, that employees are treated fairly, and have safe working conditions. So those are the kind of things that you can look out for if you enter into RFPs, but you can also look at doing addendums on existing contracts. The final trend, and I saw a quote on LinkedIn this week, and they were reviewing a day in conference, and they said that there is certain fatigue around ESG reporting and disclosure topics. Most leaders would prefer to focus on more action and less accounting. So I get that. There's been a lot of talk about this for a long time, and there does seem to be lots of talk and training. And I guess maybe take that as a sign to just get started with something today. It can be really small, but you can build on that. And I actually really do agree with that quote that I saw. And I think this year will be the year of action, 2024.
Fantastic. I'd love to touch a little bit on a common question that I've heard surface, which is, what are the potential consequences for failing to comply with CSRD? And this is where we see a really significant distinction between the way that the EU is approaching the implementation and in particular, the consequences for the kind of carrot versus stick approach as we see in the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act is all about carrot and incentives. With CSRD, it's quite different. And so one thing that we know is, as Patrick referenced earlier, this is going to impact a tremendous number of companies, but a little bit of the question is how so? And one of the important call outs that we wanted folks to take away from this conversation is when it comes to consequences for non-compliance, it's really on a country by country basis when it comes to regulatory penalties. So, we've seen France come forward as really the first country to implement what I would think of as the highest level of stringency, which is not only financial penalties, but what they have now moved forward with is up to 5 years of jail time for non-compliance. We expect to see penalties that are similar to what we have already witnessed with NFRD. And so in countries like Ireland, you already have potential jail time. Italy, there are financial penalties that are quite substantial, similar in Germany. The other real risks for non-compliance here, as well as ensuring that your data and the information that you are putting forward through disclosures, through target setting, through KPI, and through commentary by management, is that this is now part of public record, public disclosure. And so there's also opportunities for potential either shareholder lawsuits. You also have, significant brand and reputational risk for noncompliance, or for, putting forward data that isn't aligned with the realities of what you can confidently achieve. So, much higher bar for achieving rigor, transparency, and confidence than we've seen historically in other regions. And so it's really setting a new standard that I think is going to put significant regulatory and risk related pressures on leaders within companies to ensure that your compliance, your disclosures, and your also forward-looking capabilities have a new level of sophistication from what was expected before. So if we move on from this particular topic, would love to dig into, what are some of the best practices to ensure the accuracy and reliability of reporting travel-related missions. And on this particular topic, perhaps Angela, you can kick us off, and then Sally, would love for you to share a perspective as well.
First of all, thank you for being there today. So I think working with real data, with the realized data, is the most important thing. Usually the basis of the data for the CO2 emission calculations comes from the booking perspective, from the booking information. But we all know that not each part of the business trip can be covered through the central booking process. So I think we need to extend definitely the summary of the information also from the travel cost expense process. If you have, for example, a lot of train tickets booked individually at the train station, then you would see in your statistics or in your reports, you would see only the part of the spent amount, but not the distance you need for the calculation of the CO2 emissions. So make sure that those parts which are not visible in the booking process, make sure that you find solutions for tracking in the expense process, so that you can really cover all parts of the most important emissions.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we've got travel managers on the call, on the meeting today. You've probably been looking at tackling leakage, and it's a bit of a problem, and it always has been. So people booking outside of policy, it's a nightmare for you trying to get your spend all together and actually start, negotiating with your suppliers if your spend's all over. You can actually use CSRD to address this, because as Adam spoke about, there's some pretty tough penalties coming in. And there's no doubt that leadership, if you are in this first wave of CSRD, then they'll be aware of it. And so this is your chance to really tighten up, your travel policy if you needed to. If you wanted to really mandate, that, air bookings, for example, which is likely to be your biggest carbon emitter, they have to be booked through the preferred channels and not through expenses, because it's really difficult to then stitch in to get that full picture. So yeah, use CSRD to your benefit, and there's some nice if you can get everything in through the approved channels, your suppliers and category teams will all be happy with that. And M&E is another one as well, because a lot goes through expenses, and it'll be through PO and invoicing as well. So have a look at how you can manage that. There are some really good meetings and events, like carbon calculators, and you've got some really good tools out there that you can go and use that will actually calculate meetings and events, which will include the food and the buildings and AB and all of that. So I'd look at that as well, because that will all fall into this as a scope 3 emission. Oh, and the bottom piece there, I just wanted to call this out. So there's been a bit of I think this is client-led. We've wanted to see and calculate the carbon emissions of our ground transport, specifically taxis and car hire and things like that. And so it's really difficult before you just get a ticket with £15 on it. What does that tell you? But now, Free Now and Uber, they put the mileage on there, and they actually put the CO2 on there. And that no doubt has come from corporate travel buys saying we need that. So, hey, don't be afraid to ask. If you're not getting the data that you really need, this is the time to start, pushing your supply chain to support you with CSRD. My overall message is use CSRD to your advantage.
Fantastic insights. And I'm starting to see some questions roll in. Would encourage all participants, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. Again, we're going to make sure we reserve time at the end to address each of them. So for companies with international operations, how can they ensure a consistent approach to sustainable travel practices across regions? And Patrick, would love to hear your perspective and guidance on this front.
Yes, as much as I would love to tell you that, or to tell everybody that a consistent approach across regions is actually possible, we have to admit today that you should start with a consistent approach within a region. And it's even worse. You probably have to do this country by country. So when you look at the CSRD, D is the abbreviation for directive, and it is important to understand what this means in the European legal context. A directive means that each of the EU countries will have to go through or have to decide on a law for that country to implement the directive. So what happened in the past, and what will certainly happen here as well, is that this will result in subtle differences between the countries. So you have to start country by country, and your business unit in France might have in the beginning to use a different greenhouse gas standard than your business unit in, let's say, Germany. Of course, we will, from a BT4Europe perspective, try to lobby to make these differences go away, in particular when it comes to greenhouse gas standards and other technical measures. However, this is what it is all about. So I would not be too afraid about this. The CSRD asks companies to provide a number of policy documents, like what's our policy on business travel? How do we save CO2 in general? But it also provides these policy documents can be used across regions and within a region across countries. But the more specific reporting requirements, you really have to do this country by country. If you have a travel manager in Europe, involve that person. If you have a travel manager in some European, or travel managers in some European countries, involve these colleagues of yours to get started.
Perfect. So I think one of the things that we hear about really often at Clarisite, where we provide carbon planning and analysis, so forward-looking capabilities for companies in particular, with a focus on business travel today, is the importance of really building the bridge between functions. So sustainability might set, the targets at a high level across the business. However, it's really about the functional leaders helping day-to-day decision-making within business teams that are trying to achieve a core outcome for the success of the company. And yet now they have to balance this new consideration around sustainability. And so oftentimes there's tension, there's trade-offs, there's deep conversations that have to be had with leadership to ensure that they have buy-in towards the importance of sustainability within this broader set of decision-making that they have to balance. And so Sally, Angela, would love to hear both of your perspectives. Perhaps, Sally, if you can jump in first. How do you effectively communicate the importance of sustainability initiatives to ensure leadership buy-in?
This is really important, because if this isn't done properly, then things might fall flat. I think the main objective that you need to find is, if you're putting putting a strategy in, you've got to make sure it aligns with your overall business objectives. So, for example, carbon budgets, carbon taxes, I'm sure everyone's heard about those. If you are a business which is in growth, let's say, and you've got this real sort of growth target, if you put carbon budgets in place, actually limiting your sales team, for example, from traveling, that's the friction there is just going to be, it's just not great. But carbon tax might actually be a better option. For example, you can build carbon tax in as OpEx. It's an operating expense, and it's essentially a cost of selling. And the flip side, if you're in a business that's got some real, cost-cutting measures, a carbon tax, you're just not going to get the buy-in at all. Whereas a carbon budget might align. But there's lots of I'm not suggesting every company has to do those, but there's lots of things you can do. But really look at your company culture and your overall objectives, and make sure they're aligned, because you can almost make it feel like a no-brainer. If you're in cost-cutting mode as a business and you come in with a carbon budget, there isn't really a lot that they can argue with. And my other piece of advice is really keep close with your sustainability team, because they're probably going to be ultimately responsible for CSRD. Business travel is a small part of that. But you're going to be the expert here. So they're going to come to you and want to know, like, what can we do? What technologies are there? You might have peers that are doing other sustainability strategies. So you can talk to your sustainability team of different ways that have worked for your peers or ex-colleagues. So those are my 2 bits of advice, and definitely keep close to your sustainability team on this one.
Fully agree, Sally. A strong stakeholder dialogue, it's really key. I think all of us need to analyze who are the stakeholder internally and also externally, because collaboration in the green transition is really key. And don't assume that the knowledge you have about the CSRD and the role of the green transformation is the knowledge also your stakeholder has. Try to give as much as knowledge you have to your stakeholder. Make it as a topic. And the aim of the CSRD is to achieve the Green Deal targets. So that means we all, not only the internal stakeholders are important in the collaboration, also the outside, the travel industry. We all together need to build a new infrastructure which enables more sustainable traveling. Because the one part of the CSRD is to report, and the second one is also to report how do you improve it. So you will not stop with the reporting part. You continue in improving step by step your CSRD data, and also the travel behavior. And internally, you can only achieve a better understanding when you have a look what interests the stakeholders have. Do you need data? You sometimes better speak with data, be prepared, and show where the achievements can be done and what kind of change can be helpful. Sometimes some conflicts you can solve this on your own and need perhaps a controlling area. Sometimes you need the ESG part. Sometimes you need people and culture area. Sometimes you need the traveler itself, and the communication part need to be a strong one. So don't forget that also the functional stakeholder in the company are very, very constructive partners, and close alliances with them in this green transformation.
So if we move on to our next topic, one of the things that we see really frequently is that it's not only critical to have these targets, but to demonstrate quantifiable progress and impact on the sustainability initiatives that companies are setting forth. So similarly, Sally, Angela, perhaps first, we'd love to hear your perspective on how can organizations demonstrate this quantifiable impact. Again, this is a lot of what we work with companies on at Clarisite, but I think, as a practitioner for both of you, you're gonna have a really unique and pertinent perspective for the audience that's attending today.
So you will see in the practice that sometimes the conflict between sustainable travel and cost-conscious travel doesn't go hand in hand. Not always. It was in the past, but not nowadays anymore. Nevertheless, this cost consciousness, what we have in mind with our traveler, we cannot expect that the traveler will solve this topic for all of us. So I think that a very conscious travel behavior in a company need to be implemented. So do I really need to travel? Keep in mind, when do you really need to travel, and you can avoid CO2 emissions just using a conference call, a virtual meeting possibility, or if you need to travel and you use sustainable aviation fuel rate fares, for example, or you take the train. And I think that if there is the conflict between the cost and the sustainability perspective, you need also to make sure that your budget is appropriately planned. Keep in mind, what do you really want to achieve? And again, what we mentioned before with the stakeholder dialogue, the collaboration part means, and this is also the reflection that all in the entire chain, all stakeholders have their part. They need to contribute to this green transformation and the fulfillment of the CSRD.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always worth aligning carbon with financials and keeping them in the same sentence or the same paragraph, the same dashboard. Once you get people thinking about carbon and currency at the same time, I think people resonate to cost savings. And then if you put carbon savings at the same place, it's easier to get people on board sometimes. And who knows, carbon might actually be a currency in travel one day. It already is in industries like energy and manufacturing. So, we may see that, and you tend to get a lot of buy-in on that side. And then I would, again, as I mentioned before, like aligning it with your business objectives, it's more likely to get like a really big impact if it's aligning with what you're already doing at top level. So it's already aligning with what the board have already set out as an objective. So aligning it there, and again, it looks like they're all working alongside each other. And as Angela mentioned, the cost and carbon and sustainability often goes, but I quite often see like a triangle of people, profit, planet, and you might have seen that before. And sometimes they all work lovely together, but sometimes they don't. And so it's always worth looking at, when you're putting strategies in, is there going to be a clash between people and planet, or is it going to be people and profit? But luckily, some of them all work really nicely together, such as virtual meetings. It's good for everyone.
So, Angela, I would love to hear your perspective. Are there particular frameworks to benchmark the performance of business travel sustainability initiatives against industry peers?
Honestly, if I would know some, I would not trust them, because it is so important to take into consideration of your individual travel behavior. We know that travel behavior is very individual for each and every company. It depends very strong to their business. Where do they have the biggest connections? Where do they travel and how do they travel? And where do they travel and how do they travel? I think each company should take an own benchmark year, and then to track the following years and see the own development. I think the benchmark of the own company is the best one, is the most true one, and the most honest one. So have a look and take just a reference point, and then build your reports you see on regular basis. And I think when you really analyze your travel behavior, then you can really see where the improvements can be done. Include your stakeholder, include your traveler, put exact and very specified targets, and then you can see the achievement after one time. So I think this is the real and the best benchmark you can have, because the own improvement is the improvement. It really counts.
So Sally, perhaps would love to start with you, and then Angela, hear your perspective as well. But what we're seeing is very frequently businesses are starting to figure out how to adapt travel policies to align to this evolving regulatory landscape, as well as just the more broad sustainability trends that are emerging. We'd love to hear your perspective on how businesses can succeed in each of these contexts.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, tackling leakage, I think, is key. So going through the approved booking processes, then you've got the data. You're not having to stitch in expense data, which you just don't even know what carbon methodology you can apply to that. So that's a good one. I would say you're not on your own with this. Go and talk to your travel management company or TMC. They may be able to do some kind of travel policy, like a benchmark, or give you some pointers on where you are, maybe through the lens of CSRD and sustainability. And if you have budget, go and talk to a consultancy practice within travel. They've got the knowledge. They'll be able to look at it through the sustainability lens, maybe even with a materiality assessment view on it. There's help out there. So if you can get budget to support, I would. And then if you don't have any budget, your TMC should be able to help you with at least a freebie on this.
Definitely, I really fully support the approach following the central booking process. If you do not have the central booking process, you do not have any point of reference or any possibility to really understand your travel behavior, and also to steer the costs and the new travel behavior you want to implement. Keep in mind that sustainability is sometimes leading to some conflict when it comes to booking sustainable aviation fares, for example. This is just an example. So it can be manifested in other areas of business travel too. But then it is important to state in the policy also how the traveler should tackle this. Is the sustainability the first objective, and then the second is the cost consciousness? Or does the company say cost consciousness first and then sustainability? Or if these both perspectives are at the same time in conflict to each other, give in the policy really a hint how to tackle this and how to solve the situation. Because when it comes to the booking, it should be fast, it should be efficient, and each and every recommendation in the travel policy would help the traveler to take fast decisions, and the decisions in your which really support your entire company targets.
So, Angela, one of these questions that we hear about frequently, and you obviously sit in the seat, and so you manage this day in and day out. How can travel managers best address the key challenges in collecting consistent emissions data from suppliers?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. I think that it is especially very important that you are aligned with the department in charge for the preparation of the non-financial report. So when you are aligned and you know exactly what you need, then you can really challenge your vendors and to gather all the information needed. It can be that the department in charge would say, if you do not do the report on your own, so that they would need a certain methodology, a CO2 emissions calculation with a certain methodology, or you deliver the distances for each mean of transportation you had in the past year. It is very usual that you summarize the distances per mean of transportation, but it is not that easy in the practice. So you really need to make sure that also differences in the mean of transportation, I mean, if you have it depends if you have a certain amount traveled by train or a certain amount traveled by car or by e-car, for example. So the details behind are really important. Make sure that you have consistent data and not and really the realized numbers, and not the numbers you booked, you canceled, you changed, because this information are mainly part of the booking process. So make sure that your vendor is able to deliver you the really flown or traveled distances with each mean of transportation. Then we know that in the practice, it is, especially in Europe, train is not that well connected to the booking channels. And sometimes it is really a challenge to get this information from the rail operator. And then additionally, there is the component that travelers book their or buy their tickets at the rail station, and then you do not have the data. So make sure that the most important parts of your business travel are consistently booked and are also consistently reported. Now we have the discussion very often within the travel manager area. How shall we handle? What should we do with the airfares with sustainable aviation fuel? There are very different approaches from airline part, but in fact, it is not enough for the reporting to know how much CO2 emissions you avoided because you bought a certain amount of tickets with sustainable aviation fuel. What is more valuable is to know on flight level, on ticket level you bought and you've flown, how many tickets, so which ones did you bought with sustainable aviation fuel? And this is not self-understanding. When you negotiate this kind of fares and you decide to use this kind of fares, make sure that you have a common understanding with your partner airline that you really receive this information, or from your TMC. This is not self-understanding topic, because there is the route may be the same one, but you could have two different tickets on this route with different airfares behind, and your contribution to sustainable aviation fuel is a different one.
Great. So Sally, would love for you to share a perspective on what are some of the potential risks to prepare for when implementing sustainability initiatives within business travel programs?
Be prepared for pushback. I think anybody travel manager on the call, if they've put something new in place, they've got pushback. Travel's so emotive, rate caps, or new I don't know, new policies. So be prepared for that. You might, if you're bringing in an expense, I keep harping on about it, but it's really important. If you start mandating that they have to book through the approved channels, and you've got a group of travelers who just book on their credit card, maybe they get points. Or as Angela mentioned there about people turning up at the station and just booking their ticket, that's terrible. So actually, if you put processes in place to actually be able to track the carbon of that train, there might be pushback from them, and I get that. But I guess the way to mitigate that is lots of communication. Work with your marketing team to put some comms together, make it relatable. Maybe you do like quick little videos to put together to explain why you're doing it. It's not just like coming from the top, you have to do what we say. Make it relatable, and I guess just be prepared for a bit of pushback. It's that curve that we've all know. You put something in and then you get the pushback, but eventually they'll come around. I think the other risk, which is a lot more relevant in the last year, is greenwashing. And just be really careful with any wording that you put in. And this is especially relevant if you're going to have to disclose to, or your business is disclosing to the EU. Just the very word sustainable travel is an oxymoron. There's nothing sustainable about flying on a plane, unfortunately, right now. Even if there's a SAF blend, we're still going to emit thousands of tons of carbon. So, and this is a hard one to get, because some of the most forward-thinking airlines in Europe, who are arguably got really good sustainability programs, actually got fined for misleading claims on their environmental impact. So this one is a challenge, but I can share a link. There is a link that you can go in and type in some wording and it'll tell you if there's greenwashing and things like that. But I'm going to read off the script here. But the ASA, which actually fined the airlines, said currently no initiatives or viable technologies in operation within the aviation industry that would adequately substantiate absolute green claims. But just be careful when you're saying green travel, sustainable travel. It can be seen as misleading, and also look at your supply chain when they are putting sustainable, or we've offset your hotel room for the night. You can't just go and like black that out on your reporting, right? I've offset that room night or this. Be very careful, because I think greenwashing will form a big part of the CSRD disclosures.
So Patrick, would love your perspective, and Angela, perhaps for you to chime in as well. You know, we often hear about this topic. How can government and suppliers collaborate to reduce the climate impact of business travel beyond the efforts of just individual companies?
Yes, I think in making business travel more greener, you really need to look at three pillars. There's a pillar of the buyers. What can buyers do to make business travel greener? There's a pillar of suppliers. What can suppliers do for more sustainable business travel? And there's something we can require from, or many things we can require from the government to support this transformation. So quite practical. A buyer can be more stringent in the number of business trips they have. And I think this is a lesson we learned from the pandemic, when suddenly we learned that for a time, you can actually live without business travel. Not forever, but you know, is it always necessary to fly, to be on a trip and to go on a trip? So this is something buyers can do. Buyers can also require their suppliers to become more greener, and that is certainly something which puts a lot of leverage into this transition. Suppliers have their own strategies, whether they are an airline, then SAF comes into play, whether they are a rail company, then of course using electricity for their trains is more important than using fuel. There are things suppliers can do in their own category, but most importantly for this transformation, suppliers need to provide data. Suppliers need to provide the greenhouse gas we consume when we make use of their services. And at the moment, what we should expect from the governments is a definition of a coherent standard for greenhouse gas, because at the moment there are almost too many initiatives which have standardization as their mission. And so we are looking forward for the European Union as the first government to actually set a standard. It would fall back or refer back to an ISO standard, which ought to be used for its reporting. So where these three come together, buyers, suppliers, and government, I think we have a good chance to actually make progress. Angela, do you want to add on that, please?
Yes, definitely. To all you said, what the effect of all this contribution would be that we would not have just a yearly report on the emissions, on the greenhouse gas emissions we produce, because we can only manage it if we know about it before we decide what we buy and how we travel. So this information of the CO2 emission, when CO2 emission information is as important as price at the point of sale, this really supports to take the right decision when you buy travel services. So it should not be like Christmas when you do the annual report. It should be a daily information you have on your daily business included, and you can really handle it as you handle with your money.
So final question in the round robin section, and then I'll share a couple of our unique insights at Clarisite, and then jump into kind of lightning round of audience Q&A. So please continue to feel free to submit those into the Q&A box. But Sally, how can travel managers leverage existing supply chain standards to ensure ethical and sustainable practices in their travel procurement process?
I'll answer this really quickly. So your business should have some existing supply chain standards in place. And if not, they'll be working on these. So this is where you're coming to purchase, I don't know, toilet roll, for example. They might have some environmental factors in there, and you can see if there's anything that's relevant. But I think where it is relevant is if you're purchasing buildings or leasing buildings, and you're putting in sustainability parts there, you can use that when you're, in your hotel RFPs, talking with hotel chains or your venues for meetings and events. They're very similar sustainability initiatives. And finally, the GBTA Sustainability Committee, which I'm part of, is doing some work on SPCs, which are called Sustainable Procurement Criteria. We're producing lots of questions that you can just simply copy and paste into your RFPs. So you're familiar with the hotel one already, which has been updated. There's an airline one coming out very soon, which has been produced in collaboration with airlines. So the airlines have inputted, like global airlines, but we're also doing for car hire and for rail. And who knows, we may do for technology, we may come to Clarisite and give you some questions and maybe TMCs. But there's help out there. You don't need to have to know the questions. Just you don't have to reinvent the wheel, steal the wheel.
Fantastic. So if we jump into a couple of the kind of key learnings and takeaways that we've developed over the last several years at Clarisite, working with leading companies, some of the most recognizable in the world, to really enable them to treat carbon like a currency. This was touched on earlier, in order to really build emissions plans like we build financial plans that are, most importantly, aligned to the business objectives. They can't just be done in isolation for the sake of sustainability. You have to treat this as a partner and ideally an accelerant to the achievement of business outcomes while making progress towards the emissions reduction targets that have been laid out. What we see as really the best practice, and how we often work with companies through software to get this out of the cumbersome, very manual and time-consuming spreadsheet process that I'm sure many of you have experienced the pains of, is that you have to really start by developing a shared understanding of the key drivers of travel emissions and performance. And we really help companies go through this process of understanding past, present, and predictive analytics, and then using that foundational data really power the process of collaboration to both set a top-down centralized plan that leadership aligns on, but then also gather the oftentimes bottoms-up input from your functional leaders that will be driving the day-to-day decision-making in a way that accounts for the changing dynamic realities of your business. And then finally, once you've aligned on that plan with clear targets, for some of the companies that we work with, it goes as far as true carbon budgets or cost of carbon. It's about really empowering the accountable stakeholders, whether that's the GM of a region, a team lead, et cetera, with the personalized goals that meet people where they are. You need to treat oftentimes your sales team quite differently from your IT team, or certain regions need to travel differently based on modes of transportation or their business objectives, to power them with the personalized targets, the objectives, and then most importantly, giving them the real-time visibility into their team's performance so that they can make day-to-day decisions and the associated trade-offs to achieve their business outcomes while staying within particular targets on the emissions front. So what I wanted to kind of offer for those that have watched today's conversation and have gained value and want to continue to dig in, and hopefully we can provide additional value going forward, is really to offer something. And what we wanted to provide was the ability to sign up for a 30-minute CSRD travel readiness consultation. And you can see a QR code here. If you want to scan that, it will take you to a page where you can sign up, and we'll provide that 30-minute free consultation to really help identify the travel readiness for you and your company, the best practices that you can look to implement, and some of the key opportunities that can really be brought to bear to help you, again, the point of this webinar, future-proof your business for CSRD readiness ahead. So with that said, we'll dive into some of the audience Q&A. Why don't we start with the first question that I'm seeing on the open side, which is, one of the key requirements of CSRD is the double materiality assessment. Any advice on incorporating business travel and what will deem it to be material? Any one of the three panelists, feel free to jump in to take this one.
I can add my thoughts on this. So a double materiality assessment, for people who don't know, is just the standard materialities when a company will go out to their stakeholders, so their clients, their shareholders, their employees, to find out what's material to them, so that business knows what they need to look for. So why don't you do that for your business travel program? Maybe you could go out to your supply chain, you could go out to your customers, your travelers, maybe even go out to some like finance leads, find out what's material and important to that, with maybe with a sustainability lens. Where the double materiality comes in is where you need to make an assessment on how climate change could affect you as a business. So how does climate change affect business travel? I mean, with aircraft, if it's too hot, aircraft can't take off because the hot air creates some kind of, there is a technical term, but I'm not going to pretend I know it, but it causes aircraft not to be able to take off. You know, flooding, we saw an airport in Germany completely flooded over. We see a crocodile in Australia. So when we've got all these extreme weather events, we're expecting more disruption across the travel landscape. So that could form part of the double materiality that you do on your travel program. And maybe look at your travel program as a little mini organization.
Perfect. So next, Claire asks, can you share some examples, Sally, of the meetings and events calculators mentioned? I'll also just add in, before you dive in on this one, Sally, at Clarisite, we've actually built a meeting planner, a calculator that enables any company within the context of their organizational map to look at a specific event, very simply provide the inputs to say, here's the people that I want to travel there, here's the class that we anticipate them taking, and it'll not only show the anticipated emissions and costs, but if you have identified targets, it'll also show the progress against those targets that those emissions would contribute. So Sally, would love any other examples that you might feel comfortable surfacing.
I didn't know you did that. So every day's the school day. It's good to know. I'll take a look at that. Thanks for the question, Claire. So there is also a company called We Are Isla. It's a non-profit. It's a group of event managers, event companies that have come together, and they can do reporting. They've got lots of carbon calculations, but they can really support with like the end-to-end of food and even things like how far is your AV team had to travel to get in. But also Thrust Carbon have a events portal as well, which you can go in. They're more suited to the bigger events, but it's where an event plan and post-event can put in all the information, and it will give them a carbon emission score at the end. Yeah, they're the ones I'm aware of.
And I know also about Thrust Carbon that they also have great developments on calculation of the events in terms of CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
So Scott asked a question, why not use, I think this maybe goes back to something that Angela may have mentioned, but why not use a carbon intensity benchmark? For example, kg of CO2 per currency, let's say it's euros or USD spent on travel. When you were referencing internal benchmarks, he was saying this benchmarks well across companies. Curious for your thoughts there.
I love the question. Well, this is really tricky from my perspective. If you really work with the carbon intensity, and the higher the price, the lower the intensity of the carbon emission, then it would mean that if you have a private jet or if you have a business class or first class ticket, then the intensity of the carbon emission is the intensity is lower. So I think that entirely this message would be the wrong one to the entire development. So
it's a very Scott question, but I could see how it could work if there's no private jets involved, because what you could look is aiming for flat carbon emissions, but your travel spend is growing, and so then you're seeing a more positive sustainability metric. But CO2 per traveller is also a good one to look at. It's a bit more easier to understand, I think. But I know, Scott, you've got lots of work on that carbon per dollar spent.
Can I
And
also
it's
give you
tricky
my 10,
also
can I also try to give you my 10 cents of wisdom here? The carbon intensity benchmark as defined here is a relatively intelligent and advanced benchmark. And my hypothesis is that the industry will start with something really tangible, pragmatic, and maybe less intelligent than the one discussed at the moment.
So
The simpler, the better for the start.
So I recognize we're at time. This has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. Tremendously grateful to each of you for joining us as panelists today. Hopefully those that have watched have gained some real value as you look to future-proof your travel programs for CSRD ahead. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next Clarisite webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you.